November 9, 1989. The world watched, breathless, as the Berlin Wall came crumbling down. We saw it as the ultimate triumph of freedom, the end of a dark era. But what if I told you that wasn't the full story? What if the dust from that collapsing wall settled to reveal not just a united Germany, but the blueprint for the global economy we live in today, with all its winners and its staggering inequality? What if the fall of the wall was less about ending the Cold War and more about firing the starting gun for a new turbocharged era of capitalism? Most of us remember the iconic images, people streaming through checkpoints, families reunited, the sheer joy of liberation. But behind the scenes, a different kind of scramble was beginning. The moment the Iron Curtain tore open, it wasn't just people who rushed across the new frontiers. It was money, a tidal wave of it. Think of Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union as a vast, untapped economic continent that had been locked away for nearly half a century. Suddenly, the gates were thrown open. And who was waiting right there, briefcases in hand? The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and a legion of Western corporations, all ready to introduce these newly opened countries to the free market. It was sold as a promise of prosperity, a chance to catch up with the West. But for many, it felt more like an invasion. These international institutions arrived with a very specific playbook, a doctrine that came to be known as shock therapy. The idea was simple and brutal: transition from communism to capitalism as quickly as possible. Rip off the bandage in one go. This meant privatizing state-owned industries overnight, slashing government spending, and opening up to foreign trade and investment immediately. The architects of this plan believed that a slow, gradual transition would fail, that the remnants of the old system would strangle the new one before it could take root. So, they prescribed economic shock treatment. In countries like Poland and Czechoslovakia, the results were mixed. There was immense pain, soaring unemployment as old, inefficient state factories closed down. But eventually, their economies stabilized and began to grow, integrating with Western Europe. But in the biggest prize of them all, Russia, shock therapy was an unmitigated disaster. Imagine a country the size of Russia trying to completely transform its economy in a matter of months. State assets, everything from massive oil fields and steel mills to small local factories, were put up for sale. But who had the money to buy them? Not the average Russian citizen who had little to no savings. The buyers were a small group of politically connected insiders, former party officials, and opportunistic businessmen. They snapped up the crown jewels of the Soviet economy for pennies on the $1. This was the birth of the oligarchs. A handful of men became billionaires almost overnight, while millions of ordinary Russians saw their life savings wiped out by hyperinflation. Pensions became worthless. The social safety net, which had been a cornerstone of Soviet life, evaporated. For them, the end of communism didn't bring Western prosperity. It brought chaos, poverty, and a deep-seated resentment that shapes Russian politics to this very day. While Russia was reeling, another, more subtle revolution was taking place. The opening of this massive new pool of labor and resources completely rewired the way the world does business. Before 1990, corporations primarily manufactured goods within their own countries or regions. But now, they could access millions of skilled, educated, and most importantly, cheap workers in Eastern Europe and, soon after, in China. This was the dawn of the modern global supply chain. Why would a company in America pay an American worker $20 an hour to assemble a product when they could have it done in Poland for $3 or in China for $1? The logic was inescapable. Factories in the West started closing down one by one. The Made in the USA or Made in Germany labels became rarer, replaced by Made in China, Made in Vietnam, or Made in Mexico. This shift created immense wealth. Corporations saw their profits explode. Consumers in the West got access to a dazzling array of cheaper goods, from electronics to clothing. It felt like a win-win, but it came at a hidden cost. The manufacturing jobs that had been the bedrock of the Western middle class for generations began to vanish. Entire communities built around a single factory or industry were hollowed out, leading to the Rust Belt phenomenon we see in the United States and similar deindustrialized zones across Europe. The promise of global capitalism was delivering for some, but it was leaving many others behind. And this brings us to the hidden angle, the part of the story we rarely discuss. The fall of the Berlin Wall wasn't just about freedom versus oppression. It was the moment that a particular brand of unregulated globalized capitalism became the world's only operating system. With the Soviet alternative gone, there was no major ideological competitor left. This wasn't just a political victory, it was an economic one, and it set the stage for the dramatic rise in global inequality we've seen over the past 30 years. The wealth didn't just flow from east to west, it also flowed from the bottom to the very top. The new globalized economy disproportionately rewarded capital, the owners of factories, the investors, the shareholders, over labor. As supply chains went global, so did the financial markets. Money could now zip around the planet in milliseconds, chasing the highest returns, often with little to no regulation. This created a new class of super rich, a global elite whose wealth was detached from any single nation. Meanwhile, wages for the working and middle classes in the West stagnated, as they were now in direct competition with a global workforce. So when we look back at the fall of the wall, we need to see it with new eyes. Yes, it was a monumental event for human liberty, but it was also the critical juncture that unleashed the forces of globalization in their modern form. It created a world of incredible efficiency, technological marvels, and cheap consumer goods. But it also created a world of precarious work, hollowed-out communities, and a gap between the rich and the poor that is wider than at any time in the last century. The echoes of that falling wall are still all around us, in the political tensions, the economic anxieties, and the very structure of our interconnected yet deeply unequal world. The story of what happened after the celebration ended is the story of how we got to where we are today. I hope this gave you a new perspective on a pivotal moment in history. There's so much more to uncover about this topic. What do you think was the biggest long-term consequence of that day in 1989? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this journey into the hidden side of history interesting, please hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching.